Hi, and welcome to Digital Defense, the weekly cybersecurity and privacy show, broadcasting to you live from the Bloomberg News offices here in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Jordan Robertson. I've been covering cybersecurity and privacy for over a decade. This is an interactive show, so wherever you're watching this broadcast, whether it's on the Bloomberg terminal, Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, or any other platform, we encourage you to write in with questions or comments about either the topic of today or any other questions you have that I might be able to answer about security and privacy. I want to jump right in. We want to talk this week about a topic that's near and dear to everyone's heart, which is election security. We came across this article as an editorial in the Washington Post, or an op-ed in the Washington Post, written by a technology consultant. If you haven't read the article, I'll just walk you through kind of what it says. But this op-ed is written by a technology consultant, a person who consults with Democratic campaigns around the country. And it was basically written from the perspective of, there's been a lot said about security measures that states and counties are increasingly taking to shore up their, cyber defenses, in light of the hacking attempts and the successful hacks that took place in 2016 in the U.S. presidential election. And kind of the conventional wisdom, if you follow this stuff, is the states are getting on it. The states have gotten religion on this issue. The Department of Homeland Security, the federal agency, has gotten religion on this issue. They're doing a lot of outreach to states and counties and other organizations to try and protect those networks. Now that's all well and good, and that's all true. We've talked to a lot of state representatives, we've talked to a lot of state IT officials, and we've talked to a lot of technology companies and government officials who say, these states, the security of the state systems going into the 2018 midterms are just a lot better than they were, just 2 years ago. And that is a result of a lot of public awareness around what Russian spies and hackers were able to accomplish in 2016. So that's great. That's kind of the good news part of this, today's show. The bad news part is, and I read this op-ed with a lot of interest, is that if you actually look at what's happening on the ground in terms of campaigns and campaign officials' cybersecurity, you're in for a bit of a surprise, and it's not a good one. And what this individual found, which it makes total sense what this individual is writing about, what this consultant's writing about, is that if you look at the state level and the county level, the big IT systems that kind of make up our election infrastructure, they're getting a lot more visibility, they're getting a lot more looks by government officials and private cybersecurity companies for attempted hacking attempts and things like that. However, when you get down to the campaign level, which is where these battles are won and lost, what this consultant found was that talking to Democratic campaign officials across the country was kind of a jaw-dropping lack of security. And what that looks like is, one of the things that I wanted to show you. So the headline reads, "I'm teaching email security to Democratic campaigns. It's as bad as 2016. What that person means is the officials running these campaigns, and these are not all national campaigns. In fact, the majority of them are very local campaigns. Some are for House seats, some are for Senate seats. You've got the range of elections that will happen in these midterms, and many, if not most of them, never reach the kind of the national radar. The few exceptions we've seen have been these kind of insurgent candidates who win elections kind of against all odds. We've seen that in Florida, we've seen that in Massachusetts, we've seen that in New York. So those are the cases that get those are the campaigns that get a lot of attention. But if you extrapolate that out across the entire country, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of campaigns that may be kind of nominally tied into the broader party umbrella, but are not getting really any of the benefits of these kind of enhanced security measures that the states and the counties are getting. This is a really important topic to remember because, if we think back to what the Russians were so effectively able to do in 2016, with 2016 U.S. presidential election hacks, what they were able to do was compromise individual campaign staffers' personal email accounts and dump those emails. The most famous victim of this was, Hillary Clinton's, one of her senior campaign officials, John Podesta. This is a screenshot from the WikiLeaks page dedicated to just dozens and dozens of, daily leaks of his emails, just hundreds and hundreds of emails coming out all the time. And they were taken from his Gmail archive. And the way that attack worked was, while the Democratic National Committee was hacked and a lot of attention has been paid to the security or the insecurity of its systems, in my view, the most damaging hacks didn't come from those leaks. I mean, there certainly were some damaging elements, but the broader, the bigger, the larger amount of data that was disclosed, and in some ways the most kind of interesting, came from individuals' emails. And that information was weaponized in many places. So, getting back to this idea of the op-ed from this week, when you think about how many hundreds and hundreds of campaigns are operating right now around the country, many of them on shoestring budgets. We're not talking about massive campaigns here. We're talking about very local, in some cases, elections, or regional elections in some cases. What you're talking about are organizations that are don't have hundreds of staffers. They may have a few. They may have a dozen. They're very small operations that are designed to do two things: fundraise and get out the vote. That's what these campaigns do. Adding cybersecurity on top of it, even though everyone's aware of it, I think this op-ed that ran in the Post, this week, should really be kind of a wake-up call for a lot of people that, like, hey, we're doing a great job in securing these big IT systems of states and counties, and that's a great place to start, because that's where the votes are counted, that's where numbers are disseminated to the public about who's won or who's lost a particular race. But as the John Podesta WikiLeaks email dump shows, some of the most damaging information that can be gleaned and stolen by hackers doesn't come from the party itself. It comes from individuals talking about the campaigns, individuals with huge repositories of information about people inside the campaigns and how they talk about other candidates, how they talk amongst themselves, strategies, fundraising, donor stuff. That's all really potentially damaging. And I guess the big message of today's show is, there are lots of us out there. If you're part of a campaign, even a really local one, think about potential risks to your campaign were your email to get hacked. I know it may seem like such a far-flung thing. Why would the Russians be interested in me? I'm just little old somebody running, kind of a local race. Well, you have to remember that some of the most successful hacks are hyper-targeted. I've been part of investigations into some of these Russian and Chinese and others, the US as well, what hacking operations look like from the inside. And what they look like is, the more effective they are, the more targeted they are, the more effective they are. I think the big lesson of this week's op-ed in the Post is that, everybody needs to take cybersecurity seriously. Even if you're part of a campaign that you might think, I would never be on the Russians' radar. You don't have to run a presidential campaign or a national, or a campaign for a position with national prominence, like a U.S. senator or a U.S. congressperson, to be targeted. Hackers have lots and lots of different motivations. And if you're not taking email security seriously, such as doing, very basic things like adding two-factor authentication to your accounts. In some cases, if you feel the need to, adding a hardware identifier to your account. Google just rolled out its version of a hardware identifier. YubiKey and others are big players in the space. You're really putting yourself and the campaign kind of at risk, because as we saw in 2016, any of this information can be useful to attackers. I'm of the personal belief, I read a lot of these Podesta emails and looked at them. A lot of them were just kind of ordinary campaign communications. There was not a lot. Your eyes kind of glaze over at some of this stuff. It's not incriminating. It's not even inflammatory. However, what it does do, it's highly embarrassing to the campaign. And it reveals all of the campaign secrets for opponents to learn from. So there can be kind of intangible damage done, to a campaign if that information leaks, if the email information leaks. And with that, for those of you just joining us, again, this is Digital Defense, our weekly cybersecurity and privacy show. We're talking about campaign email security today, specifically this post, this op-ed in the Washington Post about how many Democratic campaign staffers' email security is just as bad, if not worse, than it was in 2016. It's a really important topic to talk about, because as viewers of this show, I want you to get kind of the view from where I sit, which is like, I look at this stuff all day long. Again, I've been covering cybersecurity and privacy for over a decade. I read all the stuff that's out there or try to talk to a lot of people every day about this topic, and the overriding message that you'll get if you read kind of popular accounts of election security is that things are much better in 2018 than they were in 2016. And in some cases that's true, but I think we need to remember that it's not just that you can't just rely on Big Brother to take care of you, whether that's the government or whether that's the party umbrella, whatever party you belong to. They are getting help from the government. They are getting attention from private sector security companies. They're getting a lot of money pouring in to secure their IT systems. And that's all well and good, but I think we all need to remember that it's really at the grassroots. It sounds cliche, but it's really at the grassroots where these battles are won and lost. And an email leak in, let's say, a swing district or a swing state, could do irreparable harm to a campaign where some of these campaigns are decided by a few hundred votes, maybe a few dozen votes. So we can't overlook the fact that it's at the grassroots where a lot of this stuff really becomes important. And I think people kind of understandably don't view themselves as targets for a nation state. But from what I can tell you, from what I've seen in my years of reporting on this subject, is that don't think that you're not going to be a target, especially if you exist in kind of one of these races or one of these communities or states that are important in the national discussion. With that, we've got some great questions coming in. For those of you just joining us again, please feel free to send in any questions or comments. Type them into the comments section wherever you're watching this show, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. It can be about today's topic, which is election cybersecurity, or any other cybersecurity or privacy topic you want me to address. We're open to those questions as well. The first question here is, do most cyber attacks still happen over email? Good question. So many of them do, and here's why. This is going to sound cliche to anybody who's looked at cybersecurity for a long time, but most people haven't. And this show is not intended for people who look at cybersecurity every day. This is a show for kind of us ordinary folks who are trying to get a better sense of how to do cybersecurity in a way that doesn't interrupt kind of the daily flow of our lives. Do most cyber attacks still happen over email? Yes, many, many, many of them do. And here's why. The John Podesta hack, the Hillary Clinton email hack that we just talked about, that was done through spear phishing. Like, I can't tell you how many times, and I know I'm not alone in this, where you get an email that looks authentic. I mean, if you're not thinking about it, you're scrolling through, it looks authentic, and it asks you to click on something. Many people will fall victim to this. Many otherwise kind of aware people will fall victim to this. And the reason is this, is we're not cybersecurity professionals. I cover it for a living, but most people are not cybersecurity professionals. They're not always paranoid about, is somebody trying to hack me? So for most people, if you get a link that looks authentic from somebody you know, or you would have otherwise good reason to open the link, you're going to open the link. So from that perspective, email is still such a good way for hackers to compromise people. And it's literally as simple as click this link, and either that downloads malware to your computer or it prompts you to enter your password, which is what happened with Podesta. He got a fake page, he entered his Gmail password, the hackers took it, entered it on their own computer, zipped up and took off all his emails and leaked it to the internet. It's as simple as that. There's a lot of discussion on zero-day vulnerabilities and NSA-level hacking. That's not even what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is social engineering, tricking somebody into opening an email and clicking on something they shouldn't. It's just so highly effective, it will never go away. Now, companies like Google and Yahoo and others do a really good job, or try to, of flagging things that they know either look suspicious or know for a fact are suspicious. Google's doing an amazing job of this. However, it's also not that hard to trick those systems if you're doing one-off kind of attacks, because the way those systems work is they look at indicators of compromise. Indicators of compromise are IP addresses, links that are used over and over, infrastructure, hacking infrastructure that's used over and over and over again. So if you get caught enough times, it's like having your face on a surveillance camera if you're robbing a bank. That image can be used by other banks to say, hey, that guy robs banks, get him out of here. The same thing with hackers. If they're using the same computers and the same links over and over, they're going to get caught. But if the hacker is skilled enough, they're going to use a one-time link. They're going to use, kind of the equivalent of a burner IP address. It's just going to be hard to catch them. So don't just rely only on companies to protect you. You got to protect yourself in a little bit in some ways as well. Next question here, is there anything I can do to protect myself if someone I'm in contact with gets hacked? Another really relevant question. Again, we saw this with the Podesta leaks. Just because John Podesta got hacked also means anybody he was in communication with, those emails also got leaked as well. And in addition to that, the hackers were able to compromise his account to ping other people in his network to say, hey, it's John, click this link, it's something important related to the campaign or whatever. It's a really hard problem because you inherently trust most things that come from people in your network. If somebody who you're communicating with over Gmail sends you a link and said, hey, check this out, and it's relevant to something you're working on, like a campaign, I always liken it to this. Like, if your boss sends you an email, you're going to click on it. You're going to click on it. You're going to open the link. The email would have to be so blatantly malicious for you not to click on it. So if John Podesta is sending emails to campaign staff, they're going to open it, even if he's not the one actually sending the email. So here's what you can do. If somebody you're in contact with gets hacked, you have to just assume that unless they've been deleting their messages systematically, any of those communications will be in that archive. Many people are not really great at deleting emails. But the other thing you can do, and this is really, really important, this is like my golden rule of online security, which is when you're online, whether it's your phone or your computer or whatever, if you didn't ask for it, you don't want it. I'll say it one more time. Online, the best tip I can give you for online security is if you didn't ask for it, you probably don't want it. Even if it's a business that you've done business with before, even if it's a long-lost friend, like if you didn't ask for it, you don't want it. What I mean by that is if you get an email that purports to come from your bank and they say, hey, your account's been compromised, click here, we'll secure the account. If it looks authentic, you should take it seriously, and you should call the bank on your own. You should Google on your own the bank's customer service number and call the bank yourself. It's called an out-of-band communication. It's a kind of a third-party way to confirm that the information you're receiving is authentic. Same with Gmail. If you get a Gmail message that says, hey, your account's been compromised, click here to change your password, don't click on the link. Just log out and go change your password on your own. That way you're not being fed to a fake site, a phishing site that exists, solely to steal your information. Promotions, things like that, pop-up ads. Like my general advice is just, if you get a communication that you find interesting, you find compelling, whether it's a sale or whether it's a security message, and you take it seriously and you feel the need to take it seriously, do take it seriously, but look to validate that information via an out-of-band channel. It's not hard. I give this advice to people all the time. You get something, even if it doesn't look suspicious, because I don't want to encourage people to be suspicious all the time either, because that's not an enjoyable experience if you're using Facebook or using Gmail, whatever. But just don't trust everything you get in your email. Don't click on it if you didn't ask for it. Next question here, how can I protect myself at work? Well, work is a different story. Here's the thing about work networks. Corporate networks, in many cases, are going to be a lot better protected than your home network, where you've got just kind of a standard consumer-grade Wi-Fi router. So if you work for a big enough company, it's a double-edged sword. You will have a lot more technology, you'll have a lot more people on the issue of cybersecurity. You can take some comfort in the fact that there are more mechanisms in place to detect and deter malicious activity. The flip side to that is it's also easier for hackers to hide in the noise. So, as a company gets bigger, so do the security risks, so does the IP that hackers might want, so does the targetability of you as an individual. Even if you don't think of yourself as a target for a nation-state attack, if you work for a big bank, if you work for a university working on sensitive research, if you work for a company that has access to financial accounts, even if they're small financial accounts, you could be a target because criminals either want money or they want intellectual property, or in some cases, as the indictment today of a alleged North Korean spy in relation to the 2014 Sony hack shows, some criminals want notoriety and kind of propaganda value from stolen data as well. So another big message of today's show is, even if you don't think that you could be a target of nation-state hackers, like many of these Democratic campaign officials around the country, think again about that. Really look at where you exist in kind of your organization, whether that's a campaign or a company. That's kind of a diversion here. In response to this question of what can you do to protect yourself at work, the unfortunate answer is you don't have a lot of control over your data when you're at work. That's the company's data. They choose how to secure that data. Some companies are better, at it than others. So if your company isn't implementing proper security protocols, kind of your best bet is to just be aware of what you're doing to try to prevent yourself from being hacked. And also potentially, reducing or eliminating, your use of personal websites and personal credentials on, corporate accounts or corporate computers. That's actually another really important thing. Like, don't use the same credentials that you use. By credentials, I mean passwords and usernames that you use for personal accounts as you would for work. Because if your corporate network gets compromised and that information leaks somehow, or it's used by some, advanced hacker, you want to kind of insulate yourself as much as possible from that information being used to access your personal accounts. So if your username and your password for work is totally different than your username and password that you use for your most sensitive accounts, like a Gmail account or a bank account or whatever, even if somebody hacks your work network, that information won't be useful in your personal life. So that's kind of the best advice I can give. And it's like, even if your organization allows for internet access, they allow you to do personal stuff on work computers, just be aware that if a hacker is inside that network, they potentially could get access to that information, keystrokes that you're typing, things like that. So it's best to kind of separate the two worlds as much as you can without being crazy about it. What I mean by that is, if your work allows internet use and you're checking a bank account because you got to pay your kids' school tuition or daycare fees or something, like, you have to do what you have to do to get by and to make life kind of comfortable for yourself. However, just try to limit it. Maybe don't log onto your bank account from your work computer. Again, you want to protect your personal information as much as possible. And one way to do that is just to separate the two worlds kind of completely. Another question here. We're getting really good questions. Thank you for these. We're going to get through as many of them as we can in the next few minutes. How can I keep someone from impersonating me? Well, this is another common technique that hackers use. They will compromise a person's account, and then they will spam their friends, because what you'll see in the email, the senders, the from section, is somebody you know. It's a friend or a colleague or whatever. So you're going to be more likely to click on it. But here's the trick: is so if your account has been hijacked and used for this purpose, chances are you'll know, because here's the advantage that we as potential victims have in this case. When hackers do that, they want the biggest bang for their buck, because they know, hey, I've compromised somebody's email account. I want to spam as many of their friends and contacts as possible, because they might discover that I'm here and eliminate my access. So the problem there is, okay, they get access to your entire contact list and they spam everybody with a malicious link or whatever. The advantage that you have as a victim in this case is that they can't personalize any of those messages. That's a big undertaking. So they can't look through your email history. It's just not feasible at scale to look through your email history and say, okay, this person talks with this person about this subject. I'm going to personalize this email to increase the odds they click on the link. That generally doesn't happen except in very targeted attacks. So you're likely to hear about it. If somebody is impersonating you online, they are using your account or they're using your name to convince somebody to give them money, to convince somebody to click on a link. The chances that you'll hear about that are actually pretty high, because we've all seen this. I mean, friends, especially friends who travel abroad a lot and they use public Wi-Fi a lot and they do all the risky things you're not supposed to do to protect your cybersecurity, they get hacked, and their friends and colleagues and family get spammed with these messages. So the best thing you can do is keep aware. Just be aware that if you get a link from somebody that looks suspicious, by all means don't click on it, and do your friend a favor, alert them, say, hey, I think your account's been hacked, flag this for Google or Yahoo or MSN or whatever, and that will do them a favor. That will give them the visibility they need to secure their accounts. Only a few minutes left here, so I'm going to try to rip through these. If you direct message on Twitter instead of email, can you avoid hacking? Well, you can't avoid hacking. Let me just dispel with this notion completely. You can't avoid hacking anywhere. However, the viewer raises a good point. Is it more secure to direct message over Twitter than email? It's not any more secure. In some ways, it may be less secure because that's a public platform. The chance that you might accidentally post something you wanted to keep private is pretty high. However, the viewer does raise a good point. Diversity in communication methods is actually a pretty good security approach. If you do everything in your life from one email account and one phone number, if either of those get compromised, you're kind of in a bad way. However, if you do have a Twitter account and you've got Facebook and you've got email and you communicate with people through lots of different ways, the potential impact from a hack is actually lessened. So don't think that just DMing on Twitter means that you're secure. You're not. However, if that's an additional way you communicate with people, it's not a terrible strategy because all your information is not in one place. That's another thing I advise people as well. Try to not keep all of your sensitive information in one place with one company, because if that gets hacked, you're in big trouble. Another question here, and then we are almost out of time. Why not encrypt all data that is emailed? Okay, another reasonable question. So here's the thing about encryption. There's been a lot, and this may take up the last few minutes here. The thing about encryption is, when I started covering hacking and stuff over a decade ago, very few websites encrypted the traffic between users' computers and the website servers. It was a big movement to get the industry to the place we are now, which is if you go on any major banking website, any major email website, any major corporate website for that matter, you'll see that little padlock in the corner and you'll see HTTPS. The S stands for SSL encryption. What that means is that the link between my computer and the website I'm visiting is encrypted. You can't peer in and see what we're doing with each other. However, that's actually a lot easier problem to solve than what's called end-to-end encryption, which means every email message I send is going to be encrypted so that only I and the recipient can view it. When we talk about encrypting websites, we're just talking about some man in the middle, preventing some adversary who's sitting between us from viewing the messages. Obviously, the website can see the message, I can see the message, anybody I'm talking to via that email provider or whatever, obviously they can see the message. But when you talk about encrypting, it's that only two parties can access that information, the sender and the recipient. It gets a lot harder. There are apps like Signal, WhatsApp is doing this now as well. That what they do is that they encrypt the communication so that even somebody sitting in the middle couldn't see it. And even the provider, Signal or WhatsApp, Facebook itself can't see the contents of those messages. Technologically, it's not that hard to do, but it requires a totally new architecture for the way these systems operate. And you can do that with a new app. You can't really do that with email, so you're left with programs, old programs that are still useful and still really valuable, like PGP and other forms of email encryption, but they're clunky to use, they're hard to use. I don't recommend them for kind of the average user, unless if you're not an average user, if you do exist in a sensitive, kind of position, a job, or you're with a campaign or whatever, then it's more encouraged to use them. But the problems, it's a very technical topic, and I'm certainly not the expert on it, but the problem exists in the underlying protocols and the way the underlying protocols work together. The reason apps like Signal and WhatsApp and others are able to do true end-to-end encryption is because they were able to build their own system from the ground up. When you talk about legacy systems, such as email, such as phone calls, things like that, you can protect the link between you and the provider, but if the provider is an intermediary between you and somebody else, like Google is an example, I don't want to communicate with Google. I want to use Google as a pass-through to communicate with whoever I'm talking to. The ability to actually encrypt your data so that my message can only be read by me and the recipient and not Google, it's just a lot harder. It's a lot more involved, and we're getting there. I don't know if we'll ever fully be there. It's a fair question. Why don't we just encrypt everything? The problem is it's difficult, and you have to look at the financial motivations for these companies. If Google encrypts all the traffic to its website, that's a plus for the business. Users are more secure, data is more secure, that's good for both sides. If Google encrypted so that it couldn't read every single message that every Gmail user writes to a recipient, if they just put a button in there, which they've been working on, a button to encrypt and decrypt, wow, that takes away a lot of visibility from the business, doesn't it? So you have to look at financial incentives too. And the financial incentives, unfortunately, are not always on the side of more security. Sometimes more security means less visibility. And for profit-making businesses, that's just not in their interest. So with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your questions. I hope my answers were helpful. Again, this issue of election security is going to be a really big one this year. We're going to touch on it more in the future. If you have any questions, feel free to catch me after the show. I'm on Twitter, which is @JordanR1000, Jordan, the letter R1000. You can please check out our website, which is bloomberg.com/technology. That's the Global Technology Team's homepage. There are links to this web series, as well as many other great content. Decrypted is a really great podcast that we do as well. With that, I wanted to thank everybody who makes this show possible. Producer Pia Gadkari, our Austin Weinstein, and everybody else who helps out with the show. Thanks so much. We broadcast live every week at noon Eastern here in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week on Digital Defense.